customizing your art. That's what I'll do in this video. My patrons had the opportunity to send in their artworks. I have picked a few of those artworks, and in this video I will show some tricks and tweaks to easily improve those artworks. To do that, I will be using my own custom brushes. In case you want to use those as well, you can find links in the description. Let's get started with the first artwork. My patron Ilse felt like this illustration is missing something. We are going to add more interest by varying the line weight and working on the lighting. If you look at the shadow in this image, then you can see that the light in this case is coming from this direction, creating a shadow on this side. So we'll be creating shadows in these areas of the ice cream. And in the places where the light is hitting, we can vary the line weight and make thinner lines here. We'll also add some shadow to the ice cream itself by picking a darker and more saturated variation of these colors. Let's start by making these lines a little bit thinner. In this case, I'm just painting over with the color of the ice cream to make the lines thinner. I'll make this one a little bit thicker because that's where the shadow should be. So these lines will be thicker. An easy way to add this waffle texture is by using the grid brush that is standard in Procreate. Put it on a separate layer, then rotate it like that. And if you have the ice cream cone on a separate layer and the grid texture on a separate layer, you can use clipping mask to clip it to the ice cream cone. If you have the eyes and the mouth on a separate layer, you can set it to alpha lock and add a little bit of shadow to the top side of the eyes and add a little highlight. I'm making a shadow here by adding a darker variation of the ice cream cone color and some shadow over here. Then I'll add a darker and more saturated variation of the ice cream color and add it to this side of the ice cream. So on the left side and on the bottom areas. And I'll do the same thing for the yellow ice cream. And that's how you can spice up this ice cream with just a few steps. The only thing this apple needs is a bit more contrast. We can make this area quite a bit darker, for instance, and we can work on these highlights in this area. I'll fix these issues by just using my basic brushes to darken and lighten some areas. First, I'll just use my basic flow brush to darken this lower area and add a more saturated red to the top parts. I blend in between by using my standard blender, and here I'm darkening this area as well. I'll add some yellows for some color variation, and by using my light and line brush, I'll brighten up this highlight over here. I'll be using the darken line brush to make this area a little bit darker and up the contrast between that little stem and the highlight. I'll also darken this side and spice up this little highlight over here. Just some final tweaks, and that's it. By just increasing the contrast and working on the edges a bit, the apple looks more realistic. The issues I'd like to fix in this portrait painting are, first of all, the skin. It looks a little bit blotchy, so we are going to blend that, for instance, in these areas. Overall, the proportions look really good, but I can see a minor issue with the mouth and with the eyes, for instance, and also with the nose. When you look at the reference image, you can see that everything is a bit angled like this. The eyes and the nose and the mouth. And on this side, it looks like it's a bit more angled that way. First, I'll fix those proportion issues by using the liquify tool. That way you can easily move stuff around. Then I'll use the smudge tool with a blending brush to blend the skin, and I'll paint on top of it with the basic flow brush, for instance. And then I'll make the hair look more like hair by using hair brushes. I'll start off by using the liquify tool. It's set to push, and I've put it to a small size to move around the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. Then I'll grab the smudge tool and set it to my standard blender to blend the skin tones here a little bit and make it look less blotchy. I'll also use the smudge tool for the hair, but this time it's set to a hairbrush. That way you can blend the hair and give it a nice hair texture at the same time. I'm using my basic flow brush to tweak the eyes and the skin a bit, and the blending brush to blend everything together. I like using my darken line brush and my lighten line brush to add these little details and add more contrast to the eyes. Same thing goes for the nose, just using my darken line brush, but also my basic flow brush and some Flowtastic brushes, which are only available to patrons. My darken brushes are great to add some darker touches, add shadows, without losing any texture in your painting. Adding some detail to the shirt here. Again, just using darken line brushes. And I'm using some hair brushes like my darken hair and lighten hair brush. Here I'll use a darken brush to darken this area and add some shadow to these hair parts. I'm trying to imagine I'm combing the hair here, following the flow of the hair. This is the lighten hair brush, adding some highlight here to the top. And once I'm happy with the hair, I'll start adding loose hairs by using a loose hairbrush. I always save this step for last. And here you see the difference a few little tweaks can make in a portrait. To spice up this landscape painting, we are going to add contrast and detail to the foreground area. When painting a landscape, try to add the most contrast and detail to the foreground and let it fade towards the background, away from the viewer. Everything that's far away will be a bit more blurry and also a bit more bluish because of the atmosphere. So that background area, that's looking great. We are just going to focus on this foreground area. I'll build up the contrast with my basic flow brushes, making the shadows darker and the highlights a bit lighter. And I'll also add some footsteps in the sand to add a little bit of interest to our foreground. I'll start in this area and use my multiply brush to darken it, using a very low opacity and soft strokes. Then I'll use the overlay brush set to a warm color to warm the sand up. Then I like using my darken line brush, pick a local color and add this little dark shadow edge. I'll just go along the waves to add that shadow. Then I'll use my flow darker brush and the lighten line brush to up the contrast even more here. Adding this little foam details. Also here, I'll use the lighten line brush again and add these little lines, diagonal lines of that foam that's on the sand. Even more foam here. Again, just using my lighten line brush, tweaking the details. Then I'll start working on the rocks here in front. I'll up the contrast by working on the shadows, making those darker, but also lightening up the highlights. I decided to darken up this area a little bit more. With contrast, you can really slowly build it up. So slowly darken the shadows and lighten the highlights. I'll start working on footsteps here by first making these little like moon shapes with my darken line brush. Keep in mind that the light is coming from this direction, making these shadows, and it's hitting this side of the footstep. So those areas should be lighter. I'll just use my lighten line brush again to add a little bit of light to these footsteps. Then I decided to darken this area a little bit more by just using the multiply brush. And that's it. More contrast? Check. All this little guy needs is a bit more contrast. Contrast means the difference between the light and dark areas. So we are going to make that difference bigger. I'm going to use basic flow brushes like the darken line and lighten line brush to work on the body area, building up that contrast, working on the edges. That will help making this bug pop from our canvas. I'll start off by making this area of the background darker by using my multiply brush. Making that background darker will really help making that bug stand out. Then I'll start slowly working on the details, making some parts darker by using my darken line brush. Making that body part quite a lot darker. And then I'll start working towards the lights. I'll use my flow lighter brush and add these light areas. I always like working from dark to light when painting. We're slowly building the contrast, making those dark areas darker and those light areas lighter. Then I'll use my overlay brush to really spice up those greens. I've set it to a green and this is really giving it that extra. You can see the difference here. Just a little bit more contrast and our bug is already looking more realistic. But we're not done yet. I'm using my light and line brush to go over these wings. Going over these like veins. And I used green at the top and I'm using a blue here at the bottom. Really adding some more color variation to this painting. And I'm using the overlay brush again, set to a blue, to add a blue glow to the top of the wings here. Just a few more tweaks with the light and line brush and the darker line brush, darkening the background a bit more. Just to make that bug really pop. Using the light and line brush again for just some final tweaks here, final highlights. And I'm darkening this area just a little bit more. And there you go, this bug has really come to life. And that's it for now. If you have enjoyed this video, then do be sure to let me know by hitting that thumbs up or leaving a comment. If a lot of you like this video, then I will be sure to make more of these. I want to thank you for watching and I will see you next time.